Now we'll have the presentation by Danielle Becker covering her research that she conducted in her paper. And the paper is titled Cochlear Implants, Language Acquisition, and Speech Intelligibility, the Effect of Age at Implantation. So, take her away.
My name is Danielle Becker. I'm a senior psychology student. This project was done for my senior seminar class in the fall, so cochlear implants, age at implantation, and speech intelligibility. First, I would just like to define what is a cochlear implant. A lot of people don't really know what this device is. It is a device that is surgically implanted into the inner ear of a severely or profoundly deafened individual to artificially produce sound. Unlike typical hearing aids, it doesn't just amplify sound, it actually creates artificial sound. It uses a series of electrodes. Today they use 24 electrodes threaded through the cochlea and connecting directly to the auditory nerve. It sends an electrical impulse directly from the speech processor, which is worn outside the body. And you can see in the bottom circular picture there, on the ear of that individual, that's the speech processor. It sends the signal directly from the speech processor directly to the auditory nerve. So in the diagram, you can see that the speech processor is outside the body, but underneath the skull is a magnet, and that connects directly through the ear to the cochlea, which then connects to the auditory nerve. So my topic choice, I have a personal connection with cochlear implants. My sister, who is 14, has 2 cochlear implants. So she's 7 years younger than me, so throughout her development I remember clearly working with her at speech therapy as a kid, so it's had a really big part in my life, cochlear implants have. So this senior sem paper, I just had a great desire to dig deeper into the empirical evidence for the language learning success I observed in my sister. For my literature review, I compiled research primarily using online databases, which included the ones listed: Academic Search Premier, EBSCO, ERIC, PsycInfo, ScienceDirect. I compiled over 30 pieces of primary literature, and I used one developmental psychology textbook to gain a theoretical understanding of hearing and language acquisition as well. So for my search strategy, using the online databases, I compiled a list of several search terms related to my topic. It was kind of hard to come up with adequate search terms because I was only interested in language development related specifically to the use of the cochlear implant and its relationship with age and implantation. So some of the search terms I used were cochlear implant, speech development, language acquisition, age and implantation, and speech intelligibility. So basically I just tried different combinations of these search terms until I had compiled a substantial amount of studies. So to narrow down which studies I was going to use, I used some pretty strict criterion. First, I used the criterion of being published within the last 20 years. A more stringent cutoff wasn't used because research with cochlear implants isn't exceedingly prevalent for a variety of reasons. First of all, among deaf individuals, there exists a distinct deaf culture that is based on the use of sign language. And deaf individuals often believe that deafness is not something that should be fixed, but rather that should be embraced. So as a result of that controversy, there's a small pool of cochlear implant users to draw from. Also, for ethical reasons, research is difficult to do with cochlear implants. Random assignment simply cannot be done because obviously you can't decide whether or not someone will receive a cochlear implant. So it's difficult to do reliable and valid empirical research. Secondly, my criteria included an adequate number of participants according to the standards for psychological research. I took into account the difficulty of obtaining participants, first of all, as I already mentioned. So the average study that I used had about 10 to 20 participants, and I also used a few smaller case studies. And lastly, I took into account the soundness of the methodology used in the studies, looking at validity and reliability of testing methods, and taking into account the desired purpose, subjects, and any other pertinent factors. So now I'll just present what I found in my literature review. So first, I would like to just bring up the relevance of the topic. They kind of already mentioned 2 to 3 out of every 1,000 kids are born deaf, but 90% of these kids are born to hearing parents. So that kind of creates controversy. Obviously, these parents want to be able to communicate with their children, but should they be allowed to decide for their children whether or not they're going to be in the deaf community or in the hearing environment? So I already mentioned the deaf controversy, but there's a controversy of whether or not parents should wait until the child is old enough to decide for themselves whether or not they want to be in the hearing environment or in the deaf world. But research has shown that there's a sensitive period for language development, so that would not be a good option. So the scope of my topic that I covered in my literature review, I first established norms for language acquisition and addressed research with brain plasticity. I investigated the effectiveness of cochlear implants in general, compared outcomes from cochlear implantation and traditional hearing aid use, and then provided evidence for success as a result of early implantation. So my thesis statement was that research suggests that the earlier children are implanted, the more successful they are in language acquisition. Cochlear implants are shown to be effective in general. Cochlear implants are shown to be more effective than other methods, including hearing aids. And cochlear implants are shown to be the most effective when children are implanted early, at younger than 2 years. So first, I covered the baseline for hearing-based language acquisition. There are several language development milestones that all children go through. First, between birth and 1 year, babbling. Between 1 and 2 years, the first words begin to appear, and then words are paired in sort of telegraphic speech. Between 3 and 5 years, improved pronunciation begins to appear, and so does complex grammar. And then after that, refined grammar begins to appear, and then conversational skills. And then it rounds out at after age 11, social expectations of speech in different environments begin to appear. So as I already mentioned, research has shown a sensitive period for language development, meaning that after a certain point, language acquisition is much more difficult or even impossible in some cases. But there is a disagreement about the age cutoff. Many say that it's at puberty, which is the age cutoff, or some say even younger than that. Brain plasticity has also been shown to be connected with language acquisition, and it is widely accepted that brain plasticity decreases with age. Second, I looked at the effectiveness of cochlear implants in general. Longitudinal studies show steady improvement over time with no plateau for language acquisition. And then I also compared cochlear implant users to children with normal hearing. Some studies show that cochlear implant recipients are able to catch up to their hearing peers in language, but this is usually the children who are implanted the earliest. But many studies also show that cochlear implant users still are unable to communicate at a level of their hearing peers, which is to be expected, as cochlear implants are an artificial form of hearing. Third, I compared the results with cochlear implants versus the results with hearing aids. Virtually all research shows that cochlear implants are more effective than hearing aids. Also, results with cochlear implants are similar to the results with children normal hearing, with hearing aid results being significantly lower. And this was this is research done among children with similar levels of hearing loss, just to keep a solid baseline. Lastly, I looked at the effect of age at implantation on results with cochlear implants. Studies have shown mixed results. Some studies show no effect of age at implantation, with other factors being more important, such as age at testing or length of implant experience. But most studies show that the age at implantation has the greatest effect on language learning. Studies agree that the earlier the child is implanted, the greater the chance of successful language acquisition, but they disagree about the age cutoff, as I already mentioned. Many say that implantation before the age of 2 is ideal, but generally they just say the earlier the better. So in conclusion, research has shown that there is a sensitive period for language development, and that cochlear implants have been shown to be effective through longitudinal studies, with recipients sometimes able to catch up with their hearing peers. Cochlear implants are much more effective than hearing aids, and the earlier children are implanted, the greater their chances of successful language acquisition. So finally, I just looked at some directions for future research. So as I mentioned before, practically, research on cochlear implants is very difficult to accomplish. First of all, it's very expensive. A cochlear implant surgery costs $84,000. And the device itself costs between $10,000 and $15,000. So it's difficult to do research when it costs that much money. Second, as I mentioned before, it cannot be experimental because of ethical reasons. And sampling issues are a problem because of the small pool of cochlear implant users that there are. It's difficult to find participants. So often they just use convenient samples of people that they already know have implants. But future research topics could include longitudinal research to investigate whether there's a plateau for language acquisition, whether other factors, such as the method of communication or the amount of support provided to the child, interact with age at implantation to increase or decrease language learning success. And then research could also be done in adult populations. This is just starting to be done where adults who have lost hearing later in life will get a cochlear implant and will be able to go back to where they were before. So that's it.
So I think we'll open it up for like 5 minutes of questions. If you have any questions for Danielle, then raise your hand. She can choose on you or not.
Yes.
Do you have any idea of how long a particular implant would last before it has to be replaced, especially in a developing child?
They're supposed to last a lifetime. Yeah.
One surgery,
Yep.
does the outer part change then?
Yes, my sister has cochlear implants, and she gets an upgrade. How often would you say?
5 to 6 years.
Every 5 to 6 years for the outer component, but the inner component is always the same.
Danielle, I would assume that some of the people in these studies had already learned to sign before they got their implants. Is that probably a good guess?
Yeah.
Did you have enough, or could you get enough information on whether it mattered if they'd already learned a language like sign and then got their implant so that because then the hearing or learning auditory language would be like acquiring a second language. Could you find out anything
I
about
didn't
that?
specifically look at that, but
Okay.
obviously that's really difficult to control because how can you deny somebody access to a language right away in their life?
Yeah.
So in my family's case, for example, my sister learned sign language when she was very young, and then she got her cochlear implant. So it's kind of difficult to determine whether if it has an effect or not.
I know that adults have to go through, some adults have to go through rigorous psychological testing before they get a cochlear implant. Do they do that with children too?
Yeah, they do.
And does that, I mean, I'm sure that would adversely affect sampling of who you pick.
Yeah, I would assume so. I didn't specifically look at that. But, yeah.
What was your most interesting or surprising thing that you found in your research? Just as you were doing, because you said you wanted to do this to learn things more in depth. So, what was it for you that was exciting to learn?
I thought it was really interesting that some studies, as I mentioned, didn't show an effect of agent implantation, which I've always been told that agent implantation is the most important thing. But those studies also showed that the length of implant experience was a bigger factor. So it's kind of like which one it is, you know? Yeah.
No more questions?
Well, then, would you mind telling us what the other winners, what were the titles of their papers, or a little bit about them?
Maybe you can help me with that. Not sure. Do you guys want to come up and? Mike left you already. Oh, Christian, you come up and.
Mine was also for senior sim, and my paper was on Dayton's department store. It's titled Refashioning the Department Store. I looked at how George Dayton's Christian values actually had an impact on his business practices, starting back in the it began in 1903, but looking more specifically at the 1920s, 1930s period. A little bit into my project.
And Michael Ringunwala talked about the war in the Congo, which has the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, I guess stats out of any war, and he examined the numbers and why it's not publicized and some things like that. So, yeah. All right. Well, why don't we give Danielle a round of applause?